Billionaire. Father sees black waitress. Let his disabled son lead a dance step, and his life changes. The city of Manhattan glittered like a crown of light, its skyscrapers piercing the night sky as if each tower were competing for dominance. And at the very center of that world of glass and steel stood Victor Harrington's empire. Victor was the kind of man headlines loved: billionaire, visionary, titan of industry. His life unfolded in boardrooms and private jets, measured not in hours but in millions. His suits were pressed to perfection, his words sharp and efficient. To the outside world he was untouchable, a man who had conquered life itself. Yet behind that immaculate exterior was a secret he rarely let anyone glimpse. A truth that unsettled him more than any corporate rival ever could. His only son, Ethan was 12, wheelchair-bound, his body fragile from cerebral palsy. To Victor, whose life was built on strength and control, Ethan was an enigma he couldn't solve, a constant reminder of vulnerability. And so, in the glass palace Victor built, there was little room for weakness. That evening, the Harrington Hotel pulsed with energy. The grand ballroom sparkled under a ceiling of crystal chandeliers, casting prisms of light onto golden tablecloths. A string quartet played softly while guests, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, clinked champagne glasses and exchanged rehearsed laughter. The occasion was Victor's annual charity gala, a night that projected generosity, though behind closed doors, it was as much about networking and prestige as it was about giving back. Victor stood near the stage, his presence commanding, his smile rehearsed. Every handshake, every nod carried weight. Cameras flashed. Journalists whispered. To them, Victor was not just a man. He was the empire itself. But then, across the ballroom, his eyes caught sight of something that unsettled his carefully maintained composure. Ethan, wheeled into the room by his caretaker, the boy sat quietly near the far corner, half hidden behind a marble pillar. His small frame, his twisted posture, and the wheels beneath his seat stood in stark contrast to the perfection of the ballroom. He was, to Victor's mind, a shadow cast on his flawless empire. Victor's jaw tightened. He forced a smile for the cameras, but he didn't look back at his son. Not directly. Not tonight. The music swelled as the dance floor filled with couples twirling under the chandeliers. The world spun in color and laughter, but for Ethan, it was a different kind of night. He sat alone, hands folded in his lap, eyes wide as he watched the dancers glide effortlessly. The longing in his gaze was unmistakable, and that was when she noticed Amara, a young waitress, balancing a silver tray stacked with flutes of champagne. Her uniform was simple, her shoes worn thin, yet she carried herself with quiet grace. Her movements were precise, her head slightly bowed, as though she wished to be invisible among the glittering guests. But invisibility sharpened her eyes. She saw what no one else dared to see, the boy in the wheelchair, sitting as though he did not belong in the world around him. As she moved past his corner, her eyes met Ethan's. For a heartbeat, the noise of the ballroom faded. No laughter, no music, no clinking of glasses. Just a boy staring at the world that excluded him, and a young woman who understood what it meant to be overlooked. And then she smiled. Not a polite, distant smile, the kind waiters give to keep guests comfortable. No, this was different. It was soft, genuine, alive with warmth. A smile that said, "I see you." Ethan's lips parted in surprise. His eyes, once dim with quiet despair, flickered with light. It was the first smile directed at him all night. The first acknowledgement that he existed. Back across the ballroom, Victor noticed the exchange. He frowned, not fully understanding why the sight unsettled him. A waitress smiling at his son. It was harmless, wasn't it? Yet to Victor it felt like a crack in his empire of glass. He turned back to his guests, laughing a little too forcefully, trying to drown out the unease that was creeping in. The gala continued with glamour and applause, speeches and shallow toasts. The chandeliers glittered, the music played on, the dancers swirled. To the wealthy, it was another night of celebration, but underneath the surface, something had shifted. A billionaire father, haunted by the sight of his fragile son, a boy, yearning to be part of a world that moved without him, and a waitress, whose single smile carried more power than all the wealth in the room. The evening ended with applause echoing through the ballroom. But for Victor Harrington, The perfection of the night felt fractured. He had everything, and yet, as he turned once more toward the shadow in the corner, he realized he had no peace. And Ethan, in his silence, realized something too, that sometimes it takes just one person, one unexpected smile, to remind you that you are seen. The clinking of glasses slowly faded as Victor Harrington took the stage. A spotlight bathed him in gold, reflecting off the glittering chandeliers above. He adjusted his tie, his expression composed, his smile thin and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice deep, commanding. "Tonight we gather not only to celebrate prosperity, but to remember the importance of giving back. True wealth, after all, is measured not in what we keep, but in what we share." Polite applause rose from the crowd. Heads nodded, champagne swirled in crystal glasses, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They weren't listening. Not really. They were waiting for the music, for the dance, for the excuse to continue their own performances of wealth. Victor's words rolled on, polished, rehearsed, yet hollow. Even he didn't believe them. To him, this speech was a transaction, another brick in the empire he was determined to build. When the orchestra struck the first notes, the ballroom transformed. Couples swept onto the dance floor, gowns swirling like waves of color, tuxedos spinning with elegant precision. The air was alive with laughter, with rhythm, with motion, all except for Ethan. From his place near the marble pillar, he watched intently, his eyes locked on the dancers. The longing was unmistakable, sharp, raw. His fingers twitched slightly on the armrest of his wheelchair, as though they too wanted to join the rhythm. Yet his body remained still, trapped. He whispered softly to himself, almost inaudible. Just once, Amara noticed. Balancing her tray, she caught the flicker in his eyes. The way he leaned forward, silent, hungry for something no one else had given him. She glanced around. Guests were distracted, laughter masking everything. Without a second thought, she set her tray down on a side table and crossed the floor toward him. Kneeling beside Ethan, she lowered her voice. Not a quiet smile, not a polite grin. A real, unrestrained laugh, bursting from deep within, shaking his small frame with joy. His eyes glowed, brighter than Victor had ever seen them. It stopped Victor cold. He had spent years ensuring his empire remained flawless, yet he could not remember the last time he had heard his son laugh like that. The sound pierced his armor, rattling something buried beneath years of pride and fear. Was it shame that gripped him? Was it awe? Or was it fear? That perhaps all the power he had built meant nothing if he couldn't give his son what this waitress had given in seconds. The question swirled, unanswered. The dance ended as quietly as it had begun. Amara gave Ethan's hands a soft squeeze, her voice a whisper. "See? You can." Ethan nodded, his smile lingering even as tears glimmered in his eyes. "Thank you," he breathed, voice trembling with gratitude. Victor stood rigid, staring at the two of them. His fists clenched at his sides, but his mask was cracking. For the first time, he didn't see Ethan as a burden. He saw him as a boy, alive, radiant, full of light. And though the music played on, though the laughter of the wealthy filled the air, Victor Harrington's world had shifted. A seed had been planted, one he would try desperately to ignore. But that would haunt him long after the chandeliers dimmed, because in that single, fragile moment, a waitress had given his son what all his wealth never could. The penthouse windows stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing the Manhattan skyline in all its shimmering brilliance. But Victor Harrington barely saw it. He stormed into the living room that night, his footsteps heavy. His jaw set like iron. He tore his tie loose, flung it across the couch, and poured himself a glass of scotch with trembling hands. The ice clinked against the crystal. But the sound that haunted him wasn't in the glass. It was in his memory, Ethan's laughter. It replayed over and over, each echo carving into him like a chisel. He slammed the glass down harder than necessary, muttering under his breath. She was out of line. That wasn't dancing. It was a spectacle. His voice rose as though someone were there to listen. People were watching, staring, mocking. But no matter how he spun it, no matter how he rationalized it, the image refused to fade. Ethan, his fragile, silent son, had looked alive, happy. Something Victor himself had never been able to give him. And that truth burned worse than any insult. By morning, Victor had convinced himself he knew what had to be done. He could fix this. He fixed everything else in his world with money. Money bought silence. Money bought control. He strode into the employee wing of his luxury hotel, a place he rarely set foot in. The walls were plain, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It smelled faintly of bleach and exhaustion. This was not his world, but he walked with the same authority he carried into boardrooms. And there she was, Amara, her uniform pressed but worn, her hair tied back neatly, her face tired yet dignified. She was sorting silverware into trays when Victor approached, his presence casting a shadow over the narrow hallway. "Miss..." His tone was sharp, clipped. "Amara, is it?" She straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir." Victor pulled an envelope from his suit jacket, thick, heavy, stuffed with bills. He extended it toward her like an order, not an offer. "This," he said, "is to ensure you never entertain my son again. Whatever you thought you were doing last night, it ends. You don't dance with him. You don't talk to him. You don't approach him. Do we understand each other?" The hallway was silent except for the faint hum of the lights. Amara stared at the envelope, then lifted her eyes to Victor's face. Her expression was too calm. Finally, she shook her head. "No, sir." Victor's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" Amara's voice was steady, each word deliberate. "Your son doesn't need your money. He doesn't need to be hidden away or silenced. He needs you." His father, her words landed like daggers. Victor, who had sparred with cutthroat CEOs, outmaneuvered politicians, and silenced critics with ease, found himself momentarily speechless. Heat rose in his chest. How dare a waitress speak to him this way? Disrespect, insolence. Yet beneath the anger, something far more dangerous stirred. The sting of truth. He shoved the envelope back into his jacket, his voice low and venomous. "You would do well to remember your place." Amara didn't flinch. "Maybe you should remember yours, sir. You're his father, not his warden." Victor turned sharply, leaving before his composure fractured further. But her words followed him down the hallway, chasing him like shadows he could not outrun. That evening, the penthouse felt colder than usual. Victor sat in his leather chair, papers spread across the desk before him. He tried to bury himself in numbers, contracts, acquisitions. Yet the words blurred on the page, drowned out by Amara's voice. "He needs you." He pressed his temples, shutting his eyes. And then, softly, hesitantly, he heard another voice. "Dad?" Victor looked up. Ethan sat in his wheelchair near the doorway, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. His voice was fragile, yet his eyes burned with something Victor hadn't seen before. Courage. "Why?" Ethan hesitated, his throat tightening. "Why are you ashamed of me?" The words cut through the silence like a blade. Victor's heart stuttered in his chest. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His mind, usually sharp and precise, was blank. Ashamed, the word echoed inside him. Heavy. Suffocating. He began but stopped. What could he say? That it wasn't shame but fear. That he didn't know how to be a father to a boy who didn't fit into his perfect world. That he was terrified of loving someone so fragile because it meant exposing his own weakness. But the truth remained locked behind his lips. He said nothing, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. His silence was answer enough. He turned his wheelchair slowly and disappeared down the hall, leaving Victor frozen, hollow, consumed by the weight of pride he could no longer deny. The Harrington penthouse became less of a home and more of a training ground. Victor doubled down after that night of silence. If he couldn't answer his son's question, then he would drown it in action. His kind of action. More therapy sessions. More specialists. More money, every morning. Ethan was driven to appointments where men in white coats stretched his limbs, tested his reflexes, drilled him with exercises that promised progress. Victor signed the checks, never missing a payment, convinced that if enough money was thrown at the problem, fate itself could be rewritten, but progress never came. Ethan's body remained frail, his hands still trembled, his legs unresponsive. Each failed session built another wall between father and son. Ethan began speaking less, retreating into silence. Laughter, the same laughter that had once cracked Victor's armor, vanished. At school, things were worse. In hallways crowded with noise, Ethan moved like a ghost. Teachers overlooked him. Classmates whispered. Bullies snickered when they thought he couldn't hear. Every smile from others felt like pity. Every silence, like invisibility. And yet, in the quiet, his heart pounded as he turned his chair toward the stage where his father stood. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling but determined. "Dad," he called softly. Victor barely turned, distracted by a conversation with a senator. "Yes, son?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Will you dance with me?" The words hung in the air like a fragile glass about to shatter. The ballroom fell silent. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned to the boy in the wheelchair and the billionaire standing before him. The orchestra faltered, waiting. Victor froze. His chest tightened, his thoughts clashing violently. He felt the weight of every gaze upon him. Pride warned him, they're watching. They'll laugh. They'll see weakness. Fear whispered, what if I fail him? What if I can't? For one heartbeat, he considered it. Stepping down, taking Ethan's hands, moving with him as Amara once had. He could see the hope shining in his son's eyes, bright, desperate, pleading. But pride won. Victor's voice was low, curt, final. "This isn't the place, Ethan." The words landed like a hammer. Ethan's face crumpled. His eyes filled instantly with tears, his small frame shaking. He turned his chair sharply, wheels squeaking against the polished floor as he pushed himself away. The crowd parted silently, shame and pity thick in the air. Victor stood frozen, his mask of power intact for the world, but inside a fracture split wide open. He had silenced the one voice that mattered most. Ethan reached the far end of the ballroom, tears streaming down his face, his hands fumbling against the wheels. He disappeared behind the heavy doors, swallowed by silence. The orchestra resumed hesitantly. Guests whispered, some shaking their heads, others pretending nothing had happened. Victor tried to force a smile, tried to return to his conversations, but his words came out hollow, his laughter brittle. For the first time, the audience saw not the billionaire, not the empire of glass, but the man inside it, utterly powerless. A father who could buy influence, power, and respect from the world, but could not give love to the one person who needed it most. And somewhere in the quiet, Ethan's broken voice echoed in Victor's memory. "Dad, why are you ashamed of me?" The Harrington ballroom lay in silence that night, a ghost of the grandeur it had hosted only hours before. The chandeliers, once blazing with brilliance, now glowed dimly, their crystals catching faint echoes of light. The tables were bare, chairs stacked neatly, the music long gone. Only the faint sound of a mop swishing against the marble floor broke the stillness. Victor Harrington stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the cold stone. He had told himself he came to check on the venue, to ensure nothing was amiss. But the truth was heavier. Guilt had driven him back here. Guilt, and the sound of his son's broken voice still lodged in his chest. He paused near the edge of the dance floor, staring at the polished surface that had become a battlefield between pride and love. The echo of Ethan's plea, "Will you dance with me?" still hung in the air. He had turned away, and now the silence mocked him. A soft voice broke the quiet. "You came back," Victor turned. Amara stood near the far side of the ballroom, her apron slightly stained from hours of labor, a rag draped over her shoulder. She was wiping down a table, her movements slow but steady. Her eyes met his, not with contempt, not even with anger, but with something far worse, sorrow. Victor faltered, words foreign in his mouth. "I just wanted to—" He trailed off, unsure. Amara set her cloth down and walked closer, her footsteps soft against the floor. She studied him, this man who ruled skyscrapers and boardrooms, now standing in the half-dark hollow-eyed. "Do you know why I noticed your son that night?" she asked quietly. Victor blinked. "Why?" Amara drew a breath, her gaze distant, as if pulling memories from somewhere deep. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible. I grew up in the Bronx. My mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I raised my brothers and sisters while she scraped by. To the world, I was just another poor girl in a forgotten neighborhood. No one looked at me, except when they wanted to remind me of what I wasn't." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "And now? I serve drinks in a ballroom filled with people who will never remember my name." Victor lowered his eyes, ashamed. But she wasn't finished. "Invisibility, though, it's a gift." Her voice softened. "It lets you see what others can't. And what I see is a boy who isn't broken. He isn't weak. He's just a child who wants one thing, to be loved by his father." The words landed like a stone in Victor's chest. His throat tightened, His hands trembled at his sides. For years he had built walls, glass towers, shields of pride. He had believed power meant never showing weakness. But here, in the quiet of the empty ballroom, those walls cracked. He sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. And for the first time in decades, tears slipped free. "I don't know how," he whispered hoarsely. His voice broke, raw, unpolished. "I don't know how to love him. I don't know how to be his father. Every time I look at him, I see fragility. And I'm terrified of losing him, terrified of failing him, so I shut him out." His shoulders shook, the weight of unspoken fear finally crashing down. Amara stepped closer, her expression gentle. She knelt beside him, placing her hand carefully over his. "Then don't shut him out," she said softly. "Don't try to drag him up into your world of glass, Victor. Step down into his. Sit where he sits. See what he sees. Start where he is. That's where love begins." Her words lingered, quiet but powerful, like a whisper that could break stone. Victor lifted his head slowly, his tear-streaked face reflecting the dim chandelier light. The lesson pierced him deeper than any deal, sharper than any insult. Love wasn't about elevating his son into the empire he built. It was about kneeling down, lowering himself, learning to walk, or roll, beside him. He nodded faintly, his voice cracking. "Step down into his world." Amara's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Yes, because that's where he's been waiting for you all along." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence on the empty ballroom floor. The billionaire and the waitress, 2 lives worlds apart, bound by the truth of a single boy's longing. Victor Harrington had spent his life building empires of glass. But tonight, in the quiet, he learned his first lesson of love. To break his pride, he would have to learn to kneel. The Harrington ballroom glistened once again, alive with the glow of chandeliers and the hum of wealth. Champagne glasses clinked, gowns shimmered, and laughter echoed through the marble halls. Another gala, another performance of prestige. But tonight, something was different. Victor Harrington stood near the stage, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. To the world, he looked every inch the titan of industry, the billionaire host, the man in control. Yet beneath the polished mask, his chest was a storm. His son sat near the edge of the dance floor, silent, watching as couples spun beneath the lights. Just like before. But Victor remembered the tears, the question that had broken him. "Why are you ashamed of me?" And he remembered Amara's words, still ringing in his ears. Step down into his world. The orchestra struck its first notes, violins rising in a graceful swell. The crowd leaned into the music, ready for another night of shallow beauty. But Victor moved. Each step toward Ethan was heavy, as though the floor itself tested his resolve. The chatter softened as people noticed, the billionaire leaving his circle of senators and CEOs to approach the boy in the chair. The boy so often left in the shadows. Ethan looked up, startled. His eyes were wide, unsure. Victor's breath caught. For the first time, he saw not a weakness, not a burden, but his son, his child, waiting. Victor did not speak. Instead, he bent, slowly, deliberately. He lowered himself to his knees on the polished marble floor until his eyes were level with Ethan's. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. The billionaire, kneeling, whispers spread like fire. Some scoffed, smirking into their glasses. Others covered their mouths, unable to hide their shock. But Victor didn't hear them. For the first time in his life, he didn't care. He reached forward, gently taking Ethan's trembling hands and placing them against his own. His voice broke the silence, low but steady. "Lead me, son." Ethan's lips parted, his chest rising sharply. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then slowly, hesitantly, he began to move his hands, guiding a rhythm he remembered from that night with Amara. A slow sway, a fragile step of grace. Victor followed. The room held its breath. Father and son moved together, awkwardly, shakily, but undeniably together. Ethan's wheelchair swayed gently as his arms directed, his small hands pressing into his father's. And for the first time, Victor let go of control. He wasn't leading. He was following. The orchestra, sensing the moment, built the music higher, the violins singing louder, the cellos deepening. The spotlight shifted, catching them in its glow. Father and son, billionaire and boy, broken and whole all at once. Gasps turned to tears. A woman dabbed her eyes. A man placed his arm protectively around his wife. Waiters paused in their service, trays forgotten, watching with quiet awe. And near the corner, Amara stood, a soft smile breaking across her face. She had seen the invisible, and now the world was forced to see it too. Victor looked only at Ethan. The pride in his son's eyes, the joy radiating from his smile, was worth more than every contract he'd ever signed. His chest tightened, but this time not with fear. With freedom, Ethan laughed, a clear, bright sound that filled the hall like sunlight breaking through glass. His father laughed too, tears streaming down his face, unashamed. Around them the room blurred. The chandeliers, the gowns, the whispers, all of it melted away. In that moment, there was only the boy and the man who had finally stepped down into his world. The music swelled to its peak. The spotlight glowed hotter, brighter, until it seemed the marble floor itself was lit from within. Victor held his son's hands tightly. He didn't let go. He never would. And as the last note of the orchestra faded into silence, a voice carried over the scene. Not spoken in the ballroom, but as if echoing beyond it, a truth to frame it all. True power is not measured by what you control, but by what you surrender. And sometimes the richest man is the one who finally learns how to love. The screen fades to black.